When you look at the life of a mother who raises her child alone, you often see a story hidden behind quiet sacrifices. This story begins in a small town where the houses were simple, the streets were dusty, and people lived close enough to know the details of each other's lives. In that town lived a woman named Zainab. She wasn't extraordinary in the way society often measures things. She didn't have wealth, she didn't have connections, and she didn't even have the comfort of a partner beside her. What she did have was an unshakable devotion to her only son, Haris. Zainab's life had never been easy. She was widowed at a young age, only in her late 20s, when Haris was just a toddler. Her husband had been a factory worker, and his sudden death left her with almost nothing except a rented 2-room home and a future full of uncertainties. For many women in her position, there would have been pressure to remarry, to find stability through another man. But Zainab made a quiet, firm decision. She looked at her son, barely able to form words, and she thought, "I will raise him. I will pour everything I have into him, and he will never feel abandoned." That decision shaped every day of her life for the next 2 decades. From morning until night, Zainab worked. She took up tailoring work at home, stitching dresses, mending clothes, and sometimes spending entire nights under the dim light of a lantern to finish orders in time. In the mornings, she would go to nearby houses to help with cleaning and cooking. Her hands became rough from the endless work, her eyes tired from lack of rest, but she rarely complained. What mattered to her was that Haris never felt the weight of their poverty as a burden on his dreams. From the very beginning, she saw something sharp in him. Haris was a bright child. He was curious, asking questions about everything, and Zainab encouraged that curiosity. She couldn't always answer his questions, but she would gently guide him. "Find it in your books. Haris, knowledge is your best friend." Sometimes, she would sacrifice her meals to save money for his school fees. At other times, she pawned the only pieces of jewelry she owned, small gifts from her marriage, to pay for his textbooks. Haris noticed these sacrifices, at least when he was young. He would sometimes hold her hands and say, "Ami, when I grow up, I'll take care of you. You won't have to work anymore." Those words were enough for Zainab. They gave her strength. She never doubted that her devotion would be remembered. As Haris grew older, his brilliance shone brighter. He excelled in school. Teachers admired his intelligence, often saying he had the potential to reach far beyond the small town. Zainab glowed with pride whenever she heard those words. She would walk home tired from work, but with a smile, because her son's achievements were a light in her difficult world. There were times, of course, when the poverty felt humiliating. Haris didn't always have the polished shoes or the fashionable clothes his classmates wore. There were whispers sometimes from neighbors about how poor families shouldn't dream too big. Zainab heard those whispers. They hurt, but she swallowed the pain. She told Haris, "Don't let what others say decide your worth. What matters is how much knowledge you carry in your mind, not what brand of shoes you wear." Slowly the years passed, and Haris's journey took him out of their small town. With scholarships and his own determination, he managed to secure admission in a prestigious university in the city. For Zainab, this was the moment she had been working toward. She packed his modest belongings in a small suitcase, pressed his clothes carefully, and handed him her life's savings in an envelope. She told him, "This is all I have. Use it wisely, and never forget where you came from." Those words stayed with him, though their meaning shifted as time went on. In the city, Haris thrived. He was ambitious, sharp, and quick to adapt. He excelled in his studies, and soon after, opportunities opened up that Zainab could barely comprehend. Internships at big firms, job offers with salaries that seemed unimaginable compared to what she earned. Every time he advanced, Zainab would quietly thank God, telling her neighbors with pride how her son was becoming someone important. But while she stayed in the same humble home, stitching clothes under a flickering light, Haris's world began to transform. The city shaped him. He met people from wealthier families, colleagues with polished manners and expensive lifestyles. At first, he tried to balance both worlds, calling his mother often, sending her money, and visiting during holidays. But over time, the gap widened. When Haris got his first big promotion, he sent money to renovate the house. Zainab thought it meant he remembered his roots, that success hadn't changed him. She told everyone proudly, "My son has become a big man now, but he still cares for his mother." But the truth was, Harris wasn't proud of his background anymore. He began to feel embarrassed by the simplicity of his upbringing. Whenever colleagues asked about his family, he gave vague answers. He didn't want them to imagine the little house with peeling paint and the mother who worked as a tailor. The shift became clearer when he started courting people from the elite circles. There was one woman in particular, Sana, the daughter of a wealthy businessman. She was elegant, confident, and used to a life of luxury. Harris was captivated by her, but deep inside, he feared that if she saw his real background, she might turn away. So he started constructing a different version of himself. He spoke less about his mother, rarely visited her, and when he did, he seemed restless, as if ashamed of being there too long. Zainab noticed the changes, though she didn't confront him immediately. She would sit quietly while he scrolled through his phone during his short visits, barely listening to her stories. She saw the way he avoided introducing her to his friends. It hurt deeply, but she kept her silence. A mother's heart often chooses patience over anger, she told herself. He's young, he's ambitious. Maybe he just needs time to realize that family is everything. But time didn't heal. It widened the distance. The breaking point came when Harris was preparing for his marriage with Sana. The arrangements were lavish, the kind of wedding people in their small town could only dream of. Zainab expected to be part of it, to stand beside her son as he entered this new chapter of life. Instead, Harris avoided the topic. When she asked gently, "Beta, when should I get my dress ready for the wedding?" He hesitated. Then with coldness that pierced her heart, he said, "Ami, it's better if you don't come. You won't fit in there? People might misunderstand." For a moment, she thought she had misheard him, but his expression told her otherwise. He was ashamed of her. The very woman who had given up her youth, her comfort, her health to raise him. That night, Zainab sat alone in her house, tears soaking her prayer mat. She replayed her life in her mind, all the nights she went hungry so he could eat, all the hours she worked so he could study. And now the son she had built her world around had abandoned her. But grief slowly turned into something else. Not rage, not a desire to scream or destroy. Something calmer, steadier, a quiet determination. She told herself, if he feels ashamed of me, then let him face the truth of what he has done. Let him understand that respect cannot be bought with wealth. It must be earned through character. And that was the moment when Zainab's path shifted. She didn't plan revenge in the fiery, destructive sense people imagine. Hers was different, measured, calm, but deeply powerful. She knew her son valued the respect of his community, his colleagues, and his in-laws more than anything else. If he was going to learn, it had to be through that very weakness. And so, silently, she began to prepare. Not with anger, but with clarity. Her revenge would not come through shouting or fighting. It would come through truth. And the truth, when revealed, would be stronger than anything her son's money could buy. Zainab's decision was not made out of sudden anger. It grew from long nights of reflection, from the silence of her empty home, and from the ache of betrayal that would not fade. For years she had told herself that her sacrifices were an investment in love, that if she gave her son everything, he would never let her feel abandoned. When that illusion broke, something else awakened in her, a strength she did not know she had. She started by observing. She listened carefully to the way neighbors spoke about Harris. In the small town where she still lived, news traveled fast. People admired him for his success. They saw him as the boy who had risen from humble beginnings to become a man of wealth and power. Some even said, "He is the pride of this town. His mother must be the luckiest woman alive." Zainab smiled bitterly when she heard such words. She didn't correct them, not yet. She knew that illusions have their own lifespan. Sooner or later, truth will catch up. She only had to wait for the right moment. Meanwhile, in the city, Harris was busy polishing his new image. His upcoming wedding to Sana was the highlight of his social circle, The guest list was long, filled with business partners, relatives of Sana's wealthy family, and people whose approval Haris craved more than anything else. He wanted the event to be perfect, grand enough to show that he belonged to their world. What he didn't realize was that Zainab, the woman he had quietly pushed aside, understood him more deeply than anyone else. She knew his weaknesses, not in the way enemies know, but in the way only a mother can see through her child. She knew his hunger for respect, his fear of embarrassment, his need to appear flawless in front of others. And she knew exactly where to strike. Zainab did not rush. She began by reconnecting with old acquaintances, women she had stitched clothes for, families she had helped during their celebrations, people who remembered her quiet kindness. She didn't speak ill of her son. She only shared small details, gentle hints, enough to spark curiosity. When someone asked her about the wedding, she would sigh softly and say, "Oh, I don't know if I'll be there. Perhaps my presence is not wanted." She never accused, never raised her voice. She simply planted seeds. And in a community where people value family bonds above wealth, those seeds began to grow. Whispers started circulating. Why wouldn't a mother attend her only son's wedding? What kind of man forgets the woman who raised him? Questions spread quietly, as they always do in close-knit places. Zainab, meanwhile, prepared herself for the larger step. She knew the wedding would be her opportunity. It would gather all the people whose respect Haris desired, the same people he had placed above his own mother. If the truth came out there, in front of them, it would strike him where it hurt most. But she also knew she had to remain calm, dignified. Anger would make her look bitter. Silence would make her invisible. She had to find a balance, a way to reveal the truth without losing her own respect. The days passed slowly, each one carrying her closer to that moment. Sometimes at night she questioned herself. Am I being cruel? Am I betraying him the way he betrayed me? But each time she remembered the pain in her chest when he told her she didn't belong at his wedding. She remembered the years of hunger, the sleepless nights, the quiet tears she had shed to give him everything. And then her resolve would return. This wasn't about cruelty. It was about justice. On the morning of the wedding, Zainab dressed herself with care. She didn't choose a luxurious outfit. She wore a simple but graceful dress, one she had stitched herself. She pinned her scarf neatly, her hands trembling only slightly as she did so. She looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror of her small home. For the first time in years, she didn't see just a tired woman. She saw strength, quiet, steady strength. She traveled to the city, her modest bag in hand, her heart pounding. When she arrived at the grand hall where the wedding was being held, she stood outside for a moment, absorbing the scene. The building was decorated with lights and flowers, expensive cars lined the entrance, and guests dressed in glittering clothes were arriving with wide smiles. Inside, Haris was radiant. He wore an expensive suit, his smile polished for the cameras, his arm linked proudly with Sana's. He felt confident. He felt untouchable, until he saw her. Zainab walked in with a slow, deliberate pace. Heads turned. Some recognized her immediately. After all, she was the mother of the groom. Whispers began almost instantly. There she is. That must be his mother. Others who had never met her looked curiously, noting her simple clothes, her calm face. Haris froze for a moment. His heart sank. He had not wanted her there. He had imagined this day without her shadow. But there she was, standing with quiet dignity in a place he thought she would never enter. He forced a smile, but his eyes betrayed his discomfort. Zainab didn't rush to him. She didn't cry or make a scene. Instead, she found a seat near the front, her presence impossible to ignore. She sat quietly, observing. The more people noticed her, the more they whispered. Why does she look so distant? Why is she alone? When the ceremony began, Zainab stayed silent. She let the event unfold, the rituals, the speeches, the laughter. But when the moment came for family introductions, when the groom was expected to honor his parents, Haris hesitated. The spotlight was on him. All eyes turned to see how he would acknowledge the woman sitting quietly in the front row. And in that silence, Zainab rose. Her movements were slow, graceful. She walked toward the stage, every step deliberate. The room fell quiet, curiosity hanging heavy in the air. She took the microphone gently, her hands steady despite the storm in her chest. She did not look at her son first. She looked at the audience, the wealthy relatives, the business partners, the friends who saw Haris as a symbol of success. Her voice was calm. "I am Zainab," she began, "the mother of the groom. Many of you may not know me. That is not surprising. My son has built a life where I am often invisible." The words struck the room like a soft but undeniable truth. People leaned forward, listening. "I raised him alone," she continued. "When his father passed, he was just a child. I worked day and night, stitching clothes, cleaning houses so he could study. I went hungry many times so he could eat. I gave up everything I had, even the small joys of my own life, so that he could reach the place he stands today." Her voice didn't tremble. She wasn't bitter, wasn't loud. She spoke like someone reciting facts etched into her very bones. "And yet," she said softly, "when his greatest day arrived, my son told me I did not belong. He said I would embarrass him, that my presence would not fit with his world." A wave of murmurs filled the hall. Faces shifted, some shocked, some uncomfortable, some judgmental. Zainab looked at Haris then. Her eyes were steady, not angry, but piercing with truth. "My son wanted respect more than anything. He thought respect came from wealth, from appearances, from the approval of people. But let me tell you something." She paused, letting the silence sink in. "Respect is not bought with money. It is earned by how you honor those who gave you life, those who sacrificed for you. If you abandon them, no amount of wealth will hide that truth." The hall was still. Even the music seemed to fade. Guests exchanged glances, some nodding, others whispering. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Zainab handed back the microphone and stepped away, her head held high. She didn't wait for applause, didn't look for pity. She had said what needed to be said. Her revenge was not in shouting, but in revealing the truth so plainly that no one could ignore it. Haris stood frozen, his face pale. The respect he had tried so hard to build was crumbling around him. He could see it in the eyes of the guests, the questions, the judgment, the disappointment. His carefully constructed image was breaking, not because of lies, but because of truth. Zainab left the hall quietly. She did not need to stay. She knew the damage was done. And for the first time in many years, as she walked back into the night air, she felt lighter. Not happy, not triumphant, but free. Her revenge had been calm, but it was complete. The night of the wedding lingered in Haris's memory like a shadow he could never escape. Long after the music had faded and the guests had gone home, the silence of his new life was filled with whispers of what had happened. The words of his mother, spoken in front of everyone he wanted to impress, were now etched into the minds of his community. At first, he tried to brush it off. He told himself people forget quickly. They were just surprised, nothing more. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. The kind of truth his mother had revealed was not the kind that vanished with time. It had the weight of something undeniable, something that grew sharper the more one thought about it. The days following the wedding were filled with small but piercing reminders of what had changed. Business associates, who once praised him without hesitation, now looked at him with a different expression, something between curiosity and suspicion. Some asked casually, "Why didn't we know about your mother before?" Others avoided the subject altogether, but their silence was louder than words. Even Sana, his new wife, was unsettled. In the privacy of their home, she asked him directly, "Is it true what she said? That she worked alone, raised you, and you kept her hidden?" Hari stumbled for answers, trying to frame the story in a way that lessened his guilt. But Sana was not naive. She had grown up in a family where respect for elders was considered more valuable than wealth. She looked at him with disappointment, and though she didn't argue further, the distance between them began quietly forming. Meanwhile, Zainab returned to her modest home in the small town. She didn't expect applause or sympathy. She wasn't interested in fame or recognition. For her, the act of standing up, of calmly telling the truth in front of the people her son valued most, had been enough. She stitched clothes again, lit her lantern at night, and lived her days quietly. But something within her had shifted. She was no longer carrying the silent burden of betrayal. She had released it into the world, and now it belonged to Harris, not her. And the community noticed. People came to her with a newfound respect. Some said, "You are a strong woman. You raised him with honor, and you spoke with dignity." Others simply visited her home more often, bringing small gifts, offering companionship. She never bragged about what had happened. She never exaggerated her story. But the people admired her calm strength, and her reputation grew. Not because she sought it, but because truth naturally commands respect. For Harris, however, the consequences deepened. His colleagues began to see him differently. They still acknowledged his skills, his intelligence, his ambition, but they could not ignore what they now knew, that beneath his polished exterior was a man who had abandoned the very woman who made his success possible. In business meetings, subtle remarks would surface. A partner once said jokingly, "We should always respect the ones who raised us, right, Harris?" It was said with a smile, but the sting was undeniable. At social gatherings, people whispered. Some admired Zainab's courage. Others criticized Harris openly. "A man who disrespects his mother will never truly respect anyone else," one elder remarked. Those words spread quickly, and in their circles, reputation was everything. Harris felt the weight of this shift. Every time he entered a room, he wondered what people were thinking. Every polite smile felt like it carried judgment. He began to realize that money could buy him luxury, but it could not buy back the respect he had lost. At home, the distance with Sana grew. She treated him kindly, but with a reserve that hadn't been there before. She visited Zainab quietly, without telling him, bringing her gifts and spending time listening to her stories. For Sana, it was impossible to ignore the dignity of a woman who had raised a son with such sacrifice. And though she didn't confront Harris directly, her respect for his mother became a quiet reminder of what he had failed to honor. One evening, after weeks of restlessness, Harris sat alone in his study. The room was filled with the trappings of success: expensive furniture, bookshelves lined with titles that spoke of ambition, certificates and awards hanging proudly on the walls. But none of it gave him comfort. His mother's words echoed in his mind. "Respect is not bought with money. It is earned by how you honor those who gave you life." He picked up his phone, hesitated, and then dialed her number. When Zainab's voice answered, calm and steady, he couldn't find the right words. He stammered, I'm sorry," but Zainab did not rush to comfort him. She listened quietly, letting his words falter into silence. Then she said, "Harris, apologies are easy, but respect is not shown with words. It is shown with actions. If you truly understand, then let your actions prove it." The conversation ended there. Zainab didn't ask for visits, didn't demand money, didn't seek promises. She left the choice with him. For the first time in his life, Harris realized that he could not control her with wealth or charm. She had taken back the power he once thought she lacked. Months passed. Harris began visiting her, at first awkwardly, then more often. The visits were not grand gestures. They were small, simple attempts at reconnecting. He sat with her while she stitched clothes, sometimes offering to help. He brought her medicines, repaired parts of the house, and slowly, very slowly, allowed himself to face the guilt he had long buried. The community noticed this too. Some forgave him, others did not. But in time, people saw the change in him, not a complete transformation, but an acknowledgement of the truth his mother had forced him to confront. For Zainab, the revenge had already been complete on the night of the wedding. What followed afterward was not revenge anymore, but life moving forward. She didn't hold grudges. She didn't remind him constantly of his betrayal. She simply lived with quiet dignity, allowing him to learn at his own pace. Her peace came not from his repentance, but from the fact that she had spoken her truth. For years, she had carried the weight of silence, the pain of being hidden in the shadows. By bringing that truth into the light, she freed herself. And in doing so, she showed everyone, including her son, that calm revenge can be more powerful than anger, more lasting than punishment. In the end, Harris would never fully escape the stain of what he had done. His reputation was scarred, his ambition humbled, but perhaps that was exactly what he needed. And for Zainab, that was enough. The story of Zainab and Harris is not just about betrayal and revenge. It is about the quiet strength of a mother who refused to let shame define her, and about the truth that respect cannot be bought. It must be earned. And as you reflect on this story, perhaps you will see parts of it in your own life, the sacrifices parents make, the temptations of ambition, the way truth, spoken calmly and clearly, has the power to reshape everything. If you found meaning in this story, I invite you to support this channel. Like the video if it touched you, share it with someone who values family and respect, and subscribe to hear more stories of calm but powerful revenge. Your support helps us continue telling stories that matter, stories that remind us of the quiet strength we often overlook.